What is Sami Zayn up to? That was the biggest question coming out of this week's edition of WWE Raw, as it was the honorary Uce who confronted Jey Uso and Jimmy Uso after, of course, they reunited together to essentially join Roman Reigns leading into the Bloodline Civil War, and that War Games match going to take place at Survivor Series. But little did we know that Sami was going to have a secret, mysterious meeting with Solo Sikoa in the parking lot. And, of course, Jey and Jimmy found the two talking, and now we have more questions than answers moving forward as we head towards Crown Jewel on Saturday. But before we jump into all that, I keep telling you guys, follow me on Twitter at WrestlePlay. Click on that link in the description and comment below. Having some fun discussions on there with you guys about current WWE and some old retro type stuff as well. So appreciate you following me there, and I appreciate all the nice words after I did mention the birth of my son last week on the SmackDown show, and so I appreciate all the kind words. Very overwhelming from you guys, so greatly appreciate it, and always appreciate your support of the channel. But let's talk about Raw, because again, I think Sami Zayn, as we said, was going to be a central figure in this now as we get closer and closer towards Survivor Series. We've got the other parts already back together. Roman Reigns, Jey Uso, Jimmy Uso, although we know it's going to be a pretty interesting meeting between Roman and Jey probably on this week's SmackDown. But Sami became, more in focus now, and we knew that was going to be the case, because you have to get there at some point, right? You have to figure out how you're going to bring Sami back into this. We talked about it on recent videos after it was pretty clear that Jey was going to be the first one to kind of come back into this, but now it is Sami, and everyone wants to know, why was he talking to Solo Sikoa? Well, I think there's a couple of different options you have to work with here on that, because if you kind of look at, the way this all played out, right? You kind of start with the backstage thing where Sami, rightfully so, is asking Jey, what are you doing? Why are you getting back into this thing, knowing that these guys were manipulating you and all of that? Like, why are you getting back into all this? And it's the same stuff we talked about, right? Jey has had to already sacrifice his Intercontinental Championship because he was brought back into this, directly via the stuff that happened with the Bloodline. Jey goes over, tries to, calm things down. That doesn't happen. The Bloodline costs him his Intercontinental title. Jey, in turn, cost them the Tag Team Championships. And so Sami has a point. Why is Jey really getting back into it? Because you know that this could potentially lead to your downfall. And we've mentioned that, for a while now as being kind of the primary motivation for Jey. Is he going to take that risk to get back on the same page with his brother, Jimmy Uso, and Roman Reigns, to potentially, again, have that downfall after he's accomplished all this success? So Sami's trying to push that. And then, of course, Jimmy tries to, say, hey, I'll talk to Sami and all this. Jey doesn't like that idea. And now we see that they find Sami talking to Solo. Well, again, there are a couple ways you can go about this. I think could be one where Sami's trying to do the same thing Jey did with Solo, right? He's trying to say, look, can we please stop this now? And why would Sami do that? In my opinion, it's because Sami wants to try to protect Jey, just like Jey was trying to maybe, protect his brother, protect the family, those kind of things. That could be one possibility, that Sami is simply trying to talk, Solo down here. No one else has really been able to do it. And so he's trying to see if he can do that to protect Jey, because what does Sami really care about Jimmy Uso or Roman Reigns? If Sami's going to get into this, we know it's about Jey Uso. That's the person who is going to, kind of bring him into this if he ultimately makes that decision to do so. What are some other options that you have to work with here when it comes to Sami? Well, maybe Sami's just trying to get information, right? Like Sami, who we know kind of made his way into the Bloodline originally, he's kind of someone who can sort of master the ability, to say certain things to the right people to get what he wants. So is Sami just trying to get some information with Solo Sikoa and trying to, maybe make Solo think that he is interested in joining the rogue version of the Bloodline leading into the War Games match? Maybe that's something where Sami is the one who, proactively calls this meeting with Solo, and he's simply just trying to get information out of him, while Solo continues to try to manipulate Sami to bring him back into his version of the Bloodline. You can see where this is going, right? There's a lot of different possibilities. And I think it's all building up to this. No matter what the reason was for this mysterious meeting between Sami and Solo Sikoa, I think it's all building towards a big moment. And that big moment, to me, is probably going to come at Crown Jewel, right? Because we now know it is official. You're going to have the 3-on-3 match. It's going to be Roman Reigns and the Usos teaming up for the first time in a good while. they're going to take on the Bloodline, which I'm going to assume is going to be Solo, Jacob Fatu, and Tama Tonga. And if that happens, you have Tonga Loa, of course, on the outside. It's 4 against 3. And if everyone thinks that Sami Zayn is going to join Solo Sikoa, we know there's going to be a follow-up to this on SmackDown this week, then you have that huge moment where you have the reuniting of the originals. You do it at Crown Jewel. It's in Saudi Arabia. We know kind of, the overwhelming positive reaction there is going to be to Sami Zayn there. And now I think when you look at it from that standpoint, do you give Sami that big moment? He's the final piece of the puzzle, and he does something here to where, even though I think it's pretty clear to everyone that Sami's not going to join Solo's side, at least you add this little bit of intrigue and makes you, again, have more questions going into SmackDown, going into Crown Jewel to see exactly what Sami is going to do. Or maybe we're wrong about all this, and they are, for some reason, going to somehow bring Sami into the fold with Solo's version of the Bloodline. And perhaps, maybe there's something else at play here. If you think about another scenario, what's another hypothetical way they could do this? Maybe Sami's talking to Solo, and maybe there's someone who's talked to Sami. Maybe it's the wise man Paul Heyman, right? Maybe Paul Heyman has put something in Sami's ear. And again, a lot of this would have had to happen on this week's edition of Raw to make all this kind of unfold. But I think at least, again, it's not so predictable now. If you have Sami talking to Solo, even though we know what the final destination is going to be here to get the original Bloodline back together, you at least have a little bit more doubt about that as we head, and again, we are still a month away. So as we head into Crown Jewel, we have a little bit more doubt. But I do wonder, are they building to that big moment where Sami Zayn is the final piece that comes together, and you do it at Crown Jewel? It's pretty clear the 4-on-4 is set, and then you're a month away from the War Games match, and the road to how we get to that could be even better based on finally having all the pieces back in place. But we'll see how they do it. Again, I think that, it was always going to be a step-by-step process, and now that we've seen Jay get back into this, and you've seen Sami start to try to talk Jay out of this, now you got to figure out how we get Sami on that side. And knowing that there is history. Jay's got to go through his history with Roman Reigns. Sami's got to go through his history with Roman Reigns. You've still got those things you got to get to, but I think you can do that over the next month, and you don't necessarily have to do that, right before Crown Jewel, right? You still have a month after that, basically, to where, and remember, too, all these guys are on Raw and SmackDown now. We're not just doing this on one show each week. We're doing this on multiple shows, so there's still plenty of ways I think you can tell the full story to why, going into this, you're still going to have Jay, I think, and Sami hesitant about teaming with Roman and Jimmy, but at least I think now you're kind of setting up the idea that, okay, we're going to make it clear that they're on the same side, but it's not going to be that easy. We're still going to have to tell the story of how are these guys going to coexist, a long-running WWE trope over the years, but how are these four going to coexist together in this War Games match to take down Solo Sikoa and company. So there you go. That was, again, I think sort of the biggest thing coming out of this, and we'll see what these interactions continue to be. We've talked about it in previous videos, how all these guys interact with each other, knowing that there are trust issues aplenty between all of them. That, to me, is going to be the biggest thing as we move forward here. So we'll see if that's how it plays out on SmackDown, and if that's what happens at Crown Jewel. But what else happened on this week's edition of Raw? Well, you did have Dominik Mysterio scoring the surprising win over Damian Priest in the main events, and we know it was set up by Adam Pearce that you were going to have Dominik versus a former world champion. I said, last week, I'm like, sure, they could, maybe bring someone out of nowhere, but I'm like, the person that makes the most sense is Damian Priest, because you have kind of built up Priest in some recent segments to have him want to get that championship back as he should, and now you have Dominik beat Damian Priest with the help, of course, of Judgment Day, using the tights, and so it's a shenanigans win from Dominik, but it's still a win nonetheless. So they're really pushing this idea that Dominik is going to get a shot at the World Championship. And so, will that eventually happen? Perhaps, because it does feel like they're moving in that direction, and Dominik kind of playing up the idea that maybe Finn Balor is doubting him a little bit, and you kind of saw Balor have some interesting reactions to that. They even had kind of an exclusive video after Raw where you can tell that Balor's got some wheels turning up, in his mind right now. Something's going on with Finn Balor, and what happens if they eventually lose those tag team championships, which we'll talk about that in just a second. But Dominik getting a win, I think, is interesting because it is going to kind of push forward, the idea that he's going to get a shot at this world title at some point. Do I think Dominik's going to be the world champion? Maybe not, but I do think he may, in fact, get an opportunity to do so. And you guys know I did a YouTube Shorts yesterday, talking about who are going to be the next opponents for Gunther for that championship. Seems like Damian Priest is a likely option. CM Punk seems like another option. I wouldn't be shocked if those are the next two in line because Gunther versus Dominik does not make a lot of sense. But, are you kind of setting up the idea that Dominik is not just sort of this lackey, but is someone who could eventually challenge for the World Championship? And like I said, you now have the question kind of added in with the way they played this up. What does that mean for how Finn Balor is going to react? Because you're already seeing some of those things here. So I think, Dominik winning is not the worst thing here. And I know people say, well, come on, Priest couldn't lose to Dominik, but how it happened, and it worked out just fine because after the match, Priest just completely destroyed Dominik and everyone in his sight. So they are kind of playing up this new edge for Damian Priest, wanting that championship back. And I think that's important too because you can't just keep things going with Damian Priest being the exact same way he was with everything going on with the Judgment Day. You need to add kind of that next layer of his development, as a character and all that kind of stuff. So I'm good with this. I think, Dominik gets the win. That is something that in and of itself, they're going to be able to play up in terms of these Judgment Day, members interacting and that kind of stuff moving forward. If Dominik gets a shot at the world title, maybe Balor starts to get a little bit jealous, those kind of things. And then you've got Priest, kind of adding that next, step in terms of him getting a potential shot, which, again, could come maybe at that Saturday night's main event show. Seems to be one of the reports out there that could be an option. So you could have Priest challenging Gunther there, and I still think CM Punk is going to be in that rotation somewhere whenever he comes back, which I would think would be after Crown Jewel. So, so you've got that. Dominik gets a huge win, one of the biggest wins of his career maybe, against a former world champion, which was Damian Priest. But speaking of that, Rhea Ripley sent kind of a message here, a little bit of a warning to Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez, making it clear that Rhea's goal is still to get that championship back. And, still, we are kind of in the same spot now with the women's title to where, what are the next matches? What are the next ones we're going to get coming out of this? But we know it's kind of a, you kind of have your break until we get there because we do have Liv versus Nia on Saturday at Crown Jewel. So you got to get through that match first. How does Tiffany Stratton factor into it? Do we get cash in anywhere? That kind of stuff. You still have to wonder how that's going to kind of, unfold there. And, what happens if Liv eventually gets cashed in on, right? Maybe Tiffany becomes a champion. Do you get a Rhea Tiffany type thing set up? There's lots of ways you can do this, but I think for now, still making it clear, Rhea's coming after the championship. That's still her number one goal. Rhea's goal is to get the championship back. And we'll see, when that happens, because you feel like there's a good opportunity to do so. You just don't know if they're going to kind of hold that off for a bit and maybe have Rhea win the title back further down the line at WrestleMania 41 perhaps, or does she win it back before then to set up a bigger match leading into that show in Las Vegas. But elsewhere, you had not much from our world champion Gunther on this show. You did have Ludwig Kaiser in action as he lost to Sheamus, so Sheamus gets a win on that one. We know Gunther and Kaiser are going to team up against Cody Rhodes and Randy Orton on SmackDown. So you had a little bit of a promo here from Gunther, but that was about it. Seth Rollins and Bronson Reed. Talk about people kind of adding the next layers to their character. Well, Seth Rollins said, you know what, I kind of like this here. I kind of like this idea of, doing this kind of stuff, bringing out the dark side in me against the monster that is Bronson Reed. So they do kind of the similar stuff where you get out in the parking lot, they're brawling with each other. Bronson Reed hits the Death Valley driver onto, off of the back of the equipment truck onto a set of tables. And then, as they've been doing, it's like Reed just gets up, right? It is just absolutely devastating move. And Reed gets up and he just walks off while officials are tending to Seth Rollins. They do the usual sent to a local medical facility type, update on Rollins. So, and as they sort of pushed on commentary, the theme here is that, all right, Rollins just got taken out by Reed, but we're only 5 days away from Crown Jewel. How is he going to make it to this match? And so you're definitely going to have, I think, that setup going into Saturday where it's not just going to be Bronson Reed versus Seth Rollins. It's going to be Bronson Reed versus a very banged-up Seth Rollins. And so how do they play that into the match? Is Seth going to be able to overcome the odds here? He's already facing the monster that is Bronson Reed. Is he going to be able to overcome the odds in terms of having these extra now bumps and bruises, and can he really defeat the beast here in Bronson Reed? So I think that's kind of the story that they're going to tell leading into that match. And like we said, that's a very important match for both men because you do feel like Seth Rollins is going to get back into the World Championship picture sooner rather than later. But you also know that Bronson Reed is someone who's been built up to be this monster. And what's the best path forward for him? And could you get into having a Bronson Reed versus Braun Breaker for the Intercontinental Championship? That's certainly something I think that would be very good for both men if you had that feud at some point, because Reed has been built up to that point now where he feels like someone who can win a big title in the WWE because of, again, the way they've kind of done this stuff over the past couple months now. So, big match coming up between Seth Rollins and Bronson Reed. We'll have our predictions on that with all the other matches for Crown Jewel as well. As we know, no longer a 5-match show. This is a much larger show than we're used to with the recent WWE PLEs. Quite a few matches on this Crown Jewel card, but we will make our predictions for those coming up here this week. But beyond that, really, again, this was sort of a show that it was seeing those interactions between Jay and Sami and Jimmy and all of that and kind of how they played everything up from there and kind of see what else we had on the show, if there's anything else I missed. But that was really about it in terms of the meaningful stuff. You did have Ivy Nile beat Zelina Vega. We did forget to mention, I say we kind of teased it a minute ago, talking about the War Raiders getting the win in that match for, getting an opportunity now at the Tag Team Championships. And, it made sense. I thought they were going to be the winners. They just came back. You kind of have them in a triple threat match against Ray and Dragon Lee and New Day. So they kind of played up the stuff again where Kofi's setting up, what was it? I think Dragon Lee for, kind of maybe to win the match. And instead, Xavier Woods decides to go after Ray. So you're still kind of, pushing and pulling in terms of the tension between Kofi and Xavier. And I think now, we see the fallout from that coming out of a match like this, where now we know the New Day aren't getting a shot at the Tag Team Championships. What does that mean for them? And we find out also, are the War Raiders going to be the ones to take the belts off of Finn Balor and JD McDonough? Because the belts have not meant a whole lot on Raw. Let's call it what it is. So do you kind of reset things, have the War Raiders win the match, and then that kind of starts, the next evolution of them. Now as new tag team championships or new tag team champions, we'll see if that's the route they decide to go. But that's kind of the way that things played out here. You had the continued stuff between R-Truth and The Miz and Final Testament. I think also afterwards, you had, Karrion Kross revealing that the Wyatt Six had gotten to The Miz and they were going to go out looking for him. So they're still playing up this storyline. It's probably not everyone's favorite thing happening on the show right now, but I always say at least people have a reason for being there. They're involved in something. They're not just wandering around aimlessly. So I'm okay with that. And again, not everything's going to be the best thing on the show. Sometimes you got to have stuff like this between the bigger stuff. And for now, I think it's fine to kind of see where this stuff goes with Miz, R-Truth, Final Testament, and we know kind of the Wyatt Six getting involved in this now. But there you go, guys. That were thoughts on this week's edition of Raw. As always, love to know what you think about the show. What did you like? What didn't you like? What do you think about Sami's meeting with Solo Sikoa? What do you think is going to be the reason behind it? And do you also think we're going to get that big moment, maybe with Sami reuniting with Roman Reigns, Jey Uso, and Jimmy Uso at Crown Jewel, or does it happen afterwards? And depending on how that big six-man tag plays out on that show. But again, guys, appreciate you watching as always. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button as well. A lot of good stuff here coming on the channel, not just with sort of the current stuff we've been doing, Raw, SmackDown, PLEs, but as I mentioned before, we're thinking about adding in some NXT stuff here. I know not everyone watches it, but I do think NXT has gotten a lot more intriguing now with the move to the CW. Also, some retro content coming here. I've been watching some old shows recently, thinking about talking about them with you guys here on the channel. So a lot of fun stuff, a lot more variety coming here on Wrestling Reaction. But again, appreciate you guys watching as always. Let me know your thoughts on this week's edition of WWE Raw.